get started and also start closed captioning if anyone needs that. We're going to invite you to mute yourself as we begin here. There will be some time for discussion a little bit later, but please feel free to use the chat freely, and we'll just continue to monitor that and bring forward things that may come up in the chat. And I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. So welcome. My name is Carrie Priest. I'm from Kansas State University. I am a professor there at Kansas State University now, and also work with Jay Gary as a coordinator for this graduate workshop series on intentional practices for graduate leadership programs. And this series is sponsored by the ILA, particularly the Leadership Educator Member Group and the Graduate Programs Group. But we are pleased to be co-hosting this month with the Association of Leadership Educators and the Graduate Leadership Focus Area Network. And we're especially thrilled for our guests to be joining us, Dr. Jennifer Moss Breen and Dr. Michael Gleason, who I know will introduce themselves a bit more as they get started, who have put together, have served as editors of a fabulous new resource, the New Directions for Student Leadership Focus on Graduate and Professional Leadership Education. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer and Michael.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie, and congratulations. Are we, can everybody see the slides, or do we need to see the slides? Can everybody see those? I'm just checking because I don't. That's okay.
I'm working on sharing those right now.
Okay, just making sure. I was like, I didn't want to operate completely blind here.
No, I understand. I think everyone should be seeing presenter or the full slides now. Let me know if you're not, please.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Michael. So hello again. My name is Jennifer Moss Breen and I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and work at Creighton University, an associate professor at Creighton University. Congratulations to you, Carrie, for your full professorship. That's really wonderful, and it's wonderful for the field too to have you be as a full professor. So congratulations to you, and welcome everyone. Michael and I embarked on this adventure, I don't know, 2020 maybe, perhaps, and I think we worked mostly during COVID on this primarily. And we did so really with the invitation of Susan Comaves, who was here. Happy birthday to Susan today, because she saw, and she and Kathy Guthrie both noticed a need for more research and scholarship around how to develop leaders in graduate and professional school settings. And so Michael and I, both working in that arena, thought this would be a great way to get to know each other and to work together. And so we embarked on this book, and have several authors are here. So we're happy to have them here. And we just look forward to sharing our thoughts and highlights. And I think with that, I'll pass it over to you, Michael.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jennifer. And again, my name is Michael Gleason, and I'm at Wartburg College in Waverly, Iowa, and I direct our Institute for Leadership Education and also serve as Associate Dean for Graduate Studies. So I'm really passionate about this area and very excited to have you all here with us. And hopefully as we embark, we see this as a start to the conversation, a continuation of the conversation, certainly not the end of the conversation. So we're excited not only to share information with you about what has been done, but to think about what can be done. So again, grateful for your time here today. What are our goals for today? Kind of what's our high level overview? So Jennifer here in a moment is going to share just a little bit more about NDSL 176. What was the motivation for this, and how did we begin our work together? And then I'll provide a very high level overview of the articles, while hoping that you will certainly dive deeper into those. And in fact, just to give you some background, we've actually, between ILA, the International Leadership Association, and the Association of Leadership Educators, have done some panels on some of these articles already. And so we hope to continue to share in other ways as well. But really, the majority of our time today will be talking about the focus group themes that emerged from the focus group that we did with students, faculty, staff, and administrators around the future of graduate and professional leadership education. And you'll have some time for interactive breakout conversation. And then again, come back and provide some ideas for us to continue to think about as we continue our work, and hopefully you partner with us And then we'll share just a little bit about how our particular issue, the summation of the issue, the last article, and sort of a metaphor that we use to think about the future of the leadership education field.
Thank you, Michael. So what prompted this series, besides Susan and Kathy and their wisdom, was that many graduate and professional leadership programs exist across higher education, and they're curricular, co-curricular settings, and we have both those examples in our book in the SL 176 series. But there's, unlike undergraduate leadership education, which is primarily grew up out of agriculture, schools that have schools of agriculture who want to develop leaders in through extension offices and such. Those programs have existed, I think, longer, and they have more of a structure to them. And they're more, I think, in some ways, much more traditional, at least in content. What we found with graduate and professional school leadership programs, they're often sort of I'm not going to say makeshift, but I will say makeshift in a way that there's maybe no plan or a strategy around developing those programs. In our Creighton University, we have a fully developed and vetted leadership program, interdisciplinary leadership, but we also have people teaching leadership in the dental school and in medical school and in nursing, and there's no one framework, strategy, discussion. It's very dispersed, and we're pursuing the Carnegie application for leadership for public purpose, just for this very reason, to see how we can integrate with each other. But the maturing, I think, of graduate and professional leadership education is vital for us. And in the second bullet, we mentioned the word andragogy. So graduate and professional school students are very, very different than the 18 to 22-year-old that enters higher education. And so how does our teaching need to shift? How do we address those needs? And I know many of you here are already doing this, and we'd like to build a community, a family, a place where others who are new to this area can find resources and assistance and ways to move forward, and a community that they can reach to with questions. So that's really what prompted this, was to elevate this topic for the field of leadership education. And we thank Susan and Kathy for bringing this to our attention and the invitation to work on the book.
If you haven't previously edited New Directions for Student Leadership, I would tell you one of the most rewarding components of this is the opportunity to collaborate with thought partners who have so many different perspectives and backgrounds and interests and institutional types. And so this issue, in my mind, really represents the power of that collaborative network. And so you can see here, these are the first 5 of the 10 chapters that are a part of the issue. And as Jennifer, just laid the foundation for, we really focused comprehensively on graduate and professional leadership education, knowing that, in fact, you could probably create an entire New Directions for Student Leadership on any one of these topics. So when I say focus on it comprehensively, we looked at not only thinking about the curriculum and what curriculum do we think is really important to have embedded within any leadership program, or what curriculum might be dependent on the context within which leadership is taught, or the institutional type. We thought about pedagogical and andragogical considerations, as Jennifer just mentioned, and thinking some of the ways we honor and acknowledge and appreciate the different types of life place that students who might be pursuing a graduate or professional education might be, and how those might be different from some of our undergraduate audiences in which leadership education has been primarily studied. And then also thinking just through administrative issues as well. I know Jim's on the call. I apologize in advance if I miss one of our authors, because I was excited to see a variety of them come in. But in a moment, when I share the second set of 5 chapters, you'll see Jim Martin wrote a really wonderful piece on thinking of some of the administrative considerations here. So when you look through these first 5 chapters, you can see they're about delivery, they're about content and andragogy, and also administrative issues as well. And something that really excited me was, while you may recognize many of these names on this list from leadership conferences or other written pieces, we also brought in some voices of folks who might not have historically been in the leadership conversation, thinking about, for example, how do we think about instructional design? This chapter 4, excuse me, Flower Darby had some amazing insight that can continue to contribute to leadership spaces while maybe coming from a background that wasn't as leadership related historically. So these are our kind of the latter part of the issue. You can see here, again, probably some familiar names and some topics you might expect, but also some additional insight as well, or maybe some approaches you didn't necessarily think would be a part of the issue. And you can see again that what we really focused on towards the latter part of the issue is doing some actual original research and thinking through how we might gather perspectives, not only from the variety of authors that contributed to articles specifically, but also from those who aren't a part of the issue in other ways. And so we got some really great perspectives that when we then wrote chapter 10, what we did is we integrated focus group results, but also some of the themes that emerged from the chapters themselves. And so as you might know from other new directions for student leadership issues, what we really worked to do, and the authors again did a masterful job of this, is thinking through not only how they can lean on some of the research and literature that exists, but then really bridging that in terms of practice into the lives of the individuals who are reading this particular piece.
And so, thank you, Michael. Article 9 was where we kind of delved into the focus group results and envisioning the future for graduate and professional leadership education. So what was so neat about the focus group, it was a whole other set of leadership educators that came from across the country. Some were brand new to the field, some had been working in it for a long time, but it was neat to have our authors who were writing chapters as well as this focus group, because now we had many more participants contributing to the knowledge that came forth in the book. We had 24 focus group participants, and in total we ran over, I think, 4 or 5 different sessions, focus group sessions. They were, the interesting thing, and this informed so much of what our book became, was that some were full-time administrators in higher education, some were traditional leadership educators, some were business people teaching in leadership education programs. So so student affairs, it ran the gamut of who was participating in the focus group. And it was so interesting to have them in the focus group together, because you have 5 or 6 people together who are coming from different areas of all working in leadership education, but listening to each other and talk about their differences and perspectives and how their courses work, who their students might be, when they teach, how they teach, all those kinds of things shifted with sort of, how they came into the field of leadership education. So it was just a really great opportunity for us to learn, and this is why I think this focus group chapter is probably one of the it becomes sort of the culmination, the beginning of the culmination of the findings from the book. Is this one mine? Sorry, my thing's not working. Sorry. So the 4 focus group themes: intentional program design, the power of place, identity as leadership educator, and multiple skill sets of the leadership educator. So how we create our programs. Yeah, we'll elaborate on those now. But yeah, let's just go forward. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So again, when we, after we provide an overview of each of these themes, then we're going to provide some time to have you in pre-assigned groups to really think about some of the questions that emerged around these topics. While, and again, Jennifer mentioned how fortunate we were to have such phenomenal colleagues who in the midst of their academic year took time to visit with us. And I'll tell you, we went back and forth on these themes. So we met several times to really discern what were the true emergent themes that came out of this. And to that idea of thinking about this as a starting place, not a finish line, with these themes, we think that there are additional questions that we need to address as we move forward. And so we'll introduce the themes now and then have you discuss some of those questions when you're actually in the breakout groups. So the first 2 themes I'm going to take point on and share just a little bit more about them. So the first theme that emerged, and again, we had lots of different codes that emerged and then ultimately collapsed those into this particular theme, was this idea of the importance of intentional program design. And this probably isn't something that surprises you, but in some ways, I think it was somewhat reassuring that leadership educators are spending so much time thinking through how they're designing their programs to be resilient in a higher education landscape and really a world and culture that are in so much tumult. And so participants, again, spend significant time and energy balancing competing demands. And in some ways, it seemed like there were these large tensions that existed, whether it was the educator, him or herself, that was mentioning this, or whether it was in the institution itself, between this idea of providing access and quality, which, you know, I think probably many of us believe those are not necessarily at opposite ends of the spectrum, but that sometimes they are perceived to be. But then also thinking through in curriculum, how we balance this idea of both theory and practice. And so it seemed like educators were spending so much time trying to consider those things. So I'm just going to provide a quick quote on this theme that's found within the actual article. And this relates to that tension of access and quality. One of our participants said, "I'm not able to deliver the same experience in that asynchronous online environment that I would if someone would come and have an in-person class. But I still believe that it's important to go ahead and do that yet, because I know I'm able to reach people who would never be able to access that learning if we didn't offer it in that way." So again, I know probably many of you are living that thought process of how am I making a really deep, impactful program, while also thinking through how am I allowing access to adult learners who have very different lives than maybe some of our undergraduate students. And then when it comes to that balancing theory and practice, there was a lot of conversation among focus group participants about this idea of exposing individuals, graduate and professional students, to the canon of leadership, and thinking about the critical importance of exposing them to this ability to be able to really deconstruct leadership theories, think about voices that are and are not represented within that theory, but then also in curriculum that can get very full very quickly, thinking about how we have that practice component that is really important in adults' lives that allows them to immediately understand how the content that they're learning is relevant to their context. And so it seemed like a lot of programs were giving thought to this idea of how they can do that. Additionally, related to that theory component, there was also this idea of the fact that when many of these students who are a part of our program, not all, but many, will actually become future leadership educators. And so thinking through how we leverage this opportunity with them to think through how we build a legitimacy of the field as we're working with these graduate students, and just how important that is. I'm just going to read again one more quote related to that theory and practice. In our world, we cannot have at least some sort of critical leadership studies lens, or applying some sort of critical social theory to our leadership studies, because the idea of deconstructing dominant narratives and how that helps us to build our capacity for holding multiple interpretations and engaging in the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So just one of those examples of someone who felt very passionately about the theory component being very important as well. Then the second theme I'm going to discuss is just this power of place. And I was one of the authors on with Lauren Edelman from Washburn University that focused on the importance of considering how each of our individual programs aligns with our institutional mission, and therefore really embraces the niche that our institutions exist within. And so that relates also to the theme that emerged. But within this power of place, it was important not only for institutions to think about how mission alignment, when they were thinking of program creation, sort of what their uniqueness is and how they can embrace that within the leadership program, but also thinking about how the program is situated within the institution itself. Jennifer mentioned this earlier, we had people from many different organizational structures or different organizational situations within universities and colleges. And it was amazing to learn more about how where they were situated within the organization impacted not only the way that they teach leadership, but also in terms of thinking about the types of resources they had available. And many of those on the focus groups thought that leadership educators really are at a place where we need to think about moving our role within organizations forward and providing leadership education to all graduate and professional students as within our organizations, not just those within a particular leadership program. But what was also illuminated was that true interdisciplinary teaching and true interdisciplinary work is very hard because of the variety of institutional norms, resource allocations, those sorts of things that exist within different institutional organizational structures. And I suspect many of you can think about times when you tried to co-teach and how different norms within the organization made that a little bit more challenging.
Thank you, Michael. And then these themes are really strongly weaved together. So themes 3 and 4, identity as leadership educator and the multiple skill sets for the leadership educator, link very much to intentional program design and the power of place. So identity as leadership educator, we heard, as I mentioned on our focus group, we had those that were working full-time in business or social services or something like that, and then they were teaching leadership. And then we have the traditionalists, those like myself who went through 4 leadership programs at University of Nebraska and became a leadership educator, and I was trained and nurtured to become that leadership educator. So the journey that one takes into leadership education impacts them very much. And because we don't often, at ALE, ILA, and many other leadership conferences, we have a chance to talk to each other, yet we still we tend to sort of cluster with people that are more similar to ourselves and programs we might understand more clearly. I just sort of noticed that anecdotally. So what the participants said is like, who am I as a leadership educator? Am I just someone who goes in and teaches on Wednesday nights, or I teach online, a leadership course online? Or am I part of the field of leadership education and I have more opportunities or more ways to fully embrace the field and have the field support me? So how one arrived to their space in leadership education was really important to how they shape their teaching, how they interact with students, how they even think about the curriculum. You know, is it more, as Michael was saying, is it more theoretically based? Is theory even important to our students? Do they need to have a deep dive into the theory? So those are some of the questions that they ponder as part of their identity. And the multiple skill sets of leadership educator, and again, Dr. Martin did hit on this pretty hard, and I'm glad because it's really important. So this is everything from every operational aspect of a program is up in question, oftentimes in a leadership education program, curricular, co-curricular. So I'm, as a faculty member, I can be designing curriculum, I can be doing assessment, I can be mentoring a dissertation student. I might also be working with the registrar on how to code a course or update the website, or working with the dean on how to grow the program, how to get enrollments. So as a program director, especially, I found that to be a huge challenge. Jim Martin now serves as our assistant program director, so he can speak to that as well. And we shared that role. Now Leah Georges, who's also an ALE person, previous president, can relate to this fact that we're called to do a lot of things, and that is definitely related to how the program is designed and where we sit within the institution, and who we are as leadership educators. So it's a slippery and windy web of ambiguity sometimes for the leadership educator.
So now that we provided just an overview of those 4 themes, we do really want to gather some feedback from you all in terms of some of the questions that we actually left that particular article thinking about ourselves as related to the 4 themes. And I'll show those to you here in just a moment, building some suspense. But what we're going to do is, Carrie was wonderful in creating breakout rooms and then assigning folks, just so that we have some equal distribution of thought and power in those. And so then what we will do is we'll give you 10 minutes in your small group to really think through the questions that we posed. Again, I'll share those here in a moment. I'll clearly begin by introducing yourselves and anything else you want to share, but then really think about those questions. And some of them have more than others. And so if you want to pick your top 1 or 2 to explore, that's great. And then what we would ask you to do, though, is while you are in that small group, I'm going to put a link here in the chat in just a moment that has a very high level overview of the theme. as well as the questions we'd like you to grapple with a bit. And then also, if you could have one person from each group put some notes in there as well, that would be wonderful. And then your other homework, please, is to assign someone who would be willing to share your thoughts with the full group when we come back to do a full group debrief after 10 minutes. So again, I know this is a lot on the screen all at one time, but it will be in, let me do this. If you click on the link that I just put in the chat, you should be able to go to the Google Doc, which also is, it's broken up by these 4 themes, as a high level overview of the theme, the guiding questions, and then some spots for your group to take some notes. And so you can see here intentional program design, thinking through some of the components and the tensions that people were thinking through in the focus groups themselves. The power of place was thinking through working beyond some of those barriers and reaching new types of student audiences where we haven't before. The identity as leadership educator is really thinking about how do we value and recognize all leadership educators regardless of their pathway, and also thinking about are there elements that we think should be shared requirements of anyone who's teaching leadership? A bit of a provocative question. And then the final one, the multiple skill sets, is just thinking through maybe ways that we can be efficient and effective and resilient as leadership educators, knowing all of those things that Jennifer just listed that are considerations and constraints on our time. So we'll go ahead. Carrie, do you mind opening up those?
Yeah, that was fast.
Yes, 10 minutes never went so fast, did it?
That went super fast. Could have had twice the time, but we'll do it again. We can do it again. Is everybody back?
We're all back.
Okay. Perfect. So we're gonna allow the groups to share, correct? Is that our process? Or did you want to go forward with the slides, Michael?
I think let's just, so that if people are okay with it, let's just go ahead. This slide is just for you to share what your prominent themes emerged in your group. What other questions should we explore if there's something we're not asking? And how should we explore those questions? So maybe just groups reporting out. If you're okay with me not putting the slides up at the moment, then we could see everyone a little bit more easily if folks are okay with that.
Sounds great. So we should start with intentional program design. Okay.
And that's Carla, Chris, Dave, and Elizabeth, and others.
Do we have our note taker from that group?
Yeah, I am a note taker. I mean, I can share what we have discussed. What we discussed is that in general, there are programs that are focused on management rather than on leadership, but they nevertheless consider themselves both management and leadership. And so it's important to, I shouldn't say educate them, but through rigorous research, expand their understanding of what leadership is, and sort of both delineate and cross-pollinate, if it's possible to do. But it's important to maintain leadership as a discipline rather than mix and match everything. So what else? Yeah, we recognize that there are many departments that feel like they already do their own leadership development. And so if we are in the position to help them do it better, that would be another way to go. Also, I mentioned in my school, we proactively reach out to other departments with a proposal to collaborate, because we say leadership is interdisciplinary, and let's help you develop those leadership, ranks, leadership cadre for the future. So we talked about quality. What does it mean, the tension between quality and access, and how potentially by increasing rigor with a discipline, we may exclude some of the population, and how to avoid doing that inadvertently. And it's important to being mindful about what we want to achieve at the end of the program, and how. And then we need to be mindful that, yes, we really would like to develop many leaders, but we should be mindful about our resources, because if we, the more students we get, the less capacity we have to offer them substantive feedback. And then what else? Yeah, I think that's it. Chris, Dave, Derek, Carl, anything I forgot? Thank you.
You're getting a thumbs up, so I think your group mates consider that having gone well. Thank you for being brave and starting us off, Elizabeth. We appreciate it. So maybe we'll move on to the power of place. So who was a part of, who's willing to share from that particular group? It looks like that was Jennifer, John, Lalin, and I was there for a couple minutes, looks like.
I just want to say, Michael, there was not enough time. We just got into the groove of it, and
I know.
I'm happy to share for our group, since I took a few notes. Although our group, again, if with more time, I think would have, we already in that short time formed some interesting interdisciplinary connections, and the folks in our group represented multiple places and spaces and disciplines, even within that small group. So just a few notes we talked about regarding place was, how do we build trust through partnerships and collaborations with communities and organizations? The opportunity of place-based learning to advocate and equip students to lead in and with their communities. We spoke a bit about the value of rich diversity within our local communities, and the implication for that, I think, is opportunity for culturally relevant leadership learning, and thinking more intentionally about that. And then how do we do hybrid learning well, and how do we continue to navigate the virtual and in-person spaces?
Great, thanks, Carrie. Wonderful ideas there. Identity as leadership educator.
Yes, we've got someone ready to speak. I think. We have notes for sure. Let me see.
I can share. And so our group talked about, I think an overarching idea is that there's a need to examine who identifies and is recognized as a leader, and how that plays a role in who identifies as a leadership educator. So we talked about that could be based on roles, whether you're an instructional faculty member or program staff, and how we define what it even means to be a leader. And so we need to broaden that conversation, recognizing that the complexity of the needs and issues facing the world. Also, how foundational theoretical perspectives within our programs can affect who feels included. Looking at the many different places that we can find leadership educators, and needing to, again, critically unpack those and who identifies in that way. And then a good example of this was in a program where there's a lot of faculty, adjuncts, and students that are coming from a lot of different disciplinary backgrounds and perspectives. So helping to bring those together and validating their experiences and their knowledge, that helps to kind of build that bridge. But there is still a need for us to have some shared content when it comes to the attitudes, values, and beliefs that we're teaching about. And if I missed anything from our group, please feel free to jump in.
You did great.
Wonderful. So our final theme of multiple skill sets of the leadership educator.
That was our group, I believe, and We like everybody else, it was kind of a rush to get through everything in 10 minutes. And but the very first thing we talked about was ILA guiding principles and resources as something to share within a program, and kind of thinking of the students first when, you know, using those principles and resources to design a curriculum that I'm kind of interpreting meets students where they are, to get that thing started. Other folks talked about just like I brought up talking about creating a culture where, you know, the senior faculty mentor those people that are just coming on, and working with adjuncts as well in that capacity, so they feel like they're a part of things. And for the full-time faculty to kind of enculturate them to what the university setting is like, and the school setting is like, and the competing demands and how to deal with them, which led folks to talk about technology training, time management skills that, you know, may not be apparent as something that we need to have when we start off, but definitely are for sure. And we were just about to get into my favorite subject, list making, and then we moved on from that to think about, you know, program strategic plans and how developing those sort of, I think, in a consensus sort of approach, consensus decision-making approach to those kind of strategic plans within a program really helps to improve the odds of their success. And then finally, at the very end, Susan chimed in with this idea, which I think it was using things for multiple purposes, which I totally resonate with. Barb Brock was the full professor when I started, and it was like, so you're going to be doing assessment. Well, then you should do a poster presentation or a conference presentation about that, and then you should take that and write an article about it and get it published. You know, I'm interpreting a little bit, but I think that's where she was going, to kind of use those things so that you're not constantly trying to do 20 different projects. And that was another theme of like, what's important, what isn't, you know, how do we differentiate that when we're trying to allocate time for our tasks? And did I cover that? Okay, group? I think so. Okay. Thank you.
Well,
Yes.
well, thanks to all those who volunteered to share. That was really helpful. Sorry, I'm gonna click through our slides to get us caught back up here. So Jennifer, I know you're going to talk about the metaphor here in a minute. I know we had a couple additional questions on here. Maybe folks can just, for the sake of time, if there are other questions that we don't have in that chart that was shared that you think we need to explore, I know we would love to hear those. So whether it's on the document or in the chat, please share those, because we know we haven't addressed all the questions that tend to be considered. Sorry, I'm jumping all over.
Okay, it's all right. This looks good. So in the book, the last chapter, when we were trying to coalesce everything into something that was visual and symbolic, Michael and I spent a summer meeting many times to figure out, what does this all mean? Because there's, as you can hear, it comes from so many directions and so many aspects that could help mature the field. So somewhere in the night, we kind of came up with the idea of, in a dream somewhere, this bamboo field, because the metaphor of the bamboo field, if you look at this bamboo field, it's a mature, the bamboo trees are huge. They've existed for many years, and they stand the same direction, and they look the same, and they act the same, yet they're probably not all the same. They probably have different, at the cellular level, they're the same, but if a bamboo tree could be a leadership educator, they might think about a few things differently. So Michael, you can go on to the next slide.
Sure. Sure. So when we were thinking about it, this idea of the seed and the fact that bamboo often spend quite a bit of time beneath the surface before you see any indication of growth germinating. And so when we were thinking about this and the metaphor being extended into this idea of graduate and professional leadership education, we were reminded of the importance of that came out in the focus group of people who shared their own journey into the leadership education calling. And so this idea that while folks came from many different places, that germination period was critical to their identity as leadership educators. And so, this has been studied in many ways. I know Carrie's on the call and has done a lot with leadership educator identity development, and maybe many others of you on this call. But it's this idea that we in graduate and professional leadership education play such an important role in the development of that seed that we might not see during the students' time in our program, the actual tall bamboo plant that Jennifer just had on the previous slide, but the investment of our time and energy in nurturing that is critical to the success of the bamboo plant once it does find its place in the leadership education arena or in practice.
And then, so once we have the seed emerging, right? So now, and as in relation to the leadership education field, I don't know how long, is there a definitive date when leadership education first launched? Susan might have an idea about that, but we're still maturing, we're growing as a field. And so now that we're above ground, so maybe we're not still, I didn't know this, but bamboo plants spend years and years and years before they even reach the ground. So now we're above the ground, we can be seen. Everyone's probably heard of a leadership education program. And now we have the plant and the shoot, and we're kind of growing, assembling together. So how do we strengthen ourselves? And this is kind of where we want our conversation to go. We're not going to have a whole lot of time, but we really want those that are here and others that are part of the focus group and the field to discuss, how do we solidify ourselves in this field and answer a lot of this ambiguity that we have in our 4 themes in the book.
And so the final sort of component of the metaphor is this idea that, and I did not know this before researching further, is that in fact, part of the reason that bamboo plants are so resilient is not because of what the structure we see above the ground is, but rather because of the very integrated and integral root system that lies beneath the surface. And so when we were thinking about those themes from the focus group, this is the part that resonates most with me, was this idea that as a leadership education field, part of what helps us be resilient are the deep networks, whether those are within our own systems, within our colleges or universities or workplaces, or whether those are things like today, where we have the opportunity to network and find resilience from one another. Even if it's something that in our institutions people don't see, we have that firm grounding that allows us to be efficient and effective and resilient within harsh environments, again, that are sometimes higher education.
So here is where our last 5 minutes will be spent. How do we continue this work as a field, as people on this call, on this Zoom call, as authors in the book? What we'd really like to know is, who, when Michael and I first met, we said, this is huge. And I know Susan probably has ideas about this too. And I hope she'll chime in, but this is a huge topic. So how do we, someone mentioned that they thought identity development could be a book in and of its own for the leadership educator, but so great. So, and yes, Carrie and others have done great work around the field of the leadership educator's career and identity development. But how do we take this forward as a collective is the question. And so that we can support each other. And this slide represents, a very strong integrated bamboo field that is, growing consistently above ground, and nurturing the new seeds that come along as well. So as Michael just put the invitation out, if you could put your name in the Google Doc here, if you'd like to be part of a continued conversation, we would love to talk further and set up some times to chat and strategize a little bit about this and take this work further.
I suspect you may feel through this webinar the way we felt at the end of the issue, which was that there's so much energy and interest around this, but we've merely started the conversation. Right? There's so much we want to share. And so we do look forward to the conversation continuing after this around these various ideas.
Yeah. So add thoughts, add your name. Is there any, we have 4 minutes. Would anyone like to chime out something that they think? There's a lot of things happening in the chat here. Something that someone might want to share out loud.
I was just going to share that this is Sequita from Stockton University. I was just going to share that I think oftentimes we think of leadership education in a graduate level just being in the classroom, but we must understand that we have to pull education outside of the classroom and understand how to add initiatives to our program. I think that aren't classroom related or given in the classroom. I don't know if anybody understands what I'm saying there, but trying to figure out how to manage our programs so that we have the classes, but we don't tend to think about graduate students outside of the program. We do that for undergrads. We have all these activities on campus for undergrads outside of campus, but we have to extend that. Thank you for the word co-curricular. We have to extend co-curricular outside of the classroom for graduates. I think we don't do that enough. Graduate students. I don't know if people agree with me there, but.
Thanks, Sequita. One more thought, if anyone wants to chime in, and then I'm sure Carrie and Jay will wrap us up.
In the identity part, oh, sorry, did I?
No, go for it.
Okay, in the identity part, I started thinking about how our gender, ethnicity, race, culture, how they get into that. Like, I know that for myself, even seeing myself as a leadership educator was such a big deal and took me so long. So I'm wondering what that would be an interesting dialogue right there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris. Okay, with that, I think we'll call this formal presentation a wrap, and I'll hand it back to you, Carrie and Jay, to close us out.
Jay, I think Jay was closing us out.
Thank you for coming today to the ILA and ALE workshop. We have a leadership intersections. We have annual conferences of ALE coming up this July. Let's keep focusing, and Leadership Academy with many of our folks today are leading in St. Paul in July. Expect to hear from Michael Gleason, and then also we're gathering in Vancouver online as well as in person for the 25th. This is the wrong sign, but the 25th ILA Global Conference in mid-October. Thank you again for coming. Thank you, Carrie, for convening us. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.